The evening shimmered with golden light and laughter that echoed beneath the tall chandeliers of the Grandwood Hotel. Every corner of the ballroom seemed wrapped in wealth, from the ivory-white drapes brushing against crystal walls to the fragrance of lilies and roses that drifted like memory through the air. Emma Collins stepped through the arched doorway feeling as though she had accidentally walked into someone else's dream. Her reflection flashed in the mirrored panels. A young woman in a soft pastel dress she had found at a thrift store 2 weeks earlier, a dress that had looked elegant under the yellow light of her tiny apartment, but seemed far too humble now among a sea of silk and sequins. Her shoes pinched a little, her hands trembled slightly, yet she held her small clutch close to her chest and tried to convince herself she belonged here. She told herself that this was just another event, a wedding, a celebration, a night of dancing, and that she would quietly blend into the background until it was polite enough to leave. Emma had been invited by her college friend Lily Andrews, who was now the bride. They had shared late-night study sessions and instant noodles during university days, and though they had grown apart in recent years, Lily had insisted she come. Emma had hesitated at first, knowing she would know almost no one, but the tone in Lily's message, "Please come, it would mean so much to me," had softened her heart. Still, the moment she entered the ballroom and saw the grand staircase lined with marble and flowers, she realized just how far their worlds had drifted apart. Lily's new life shimmered with wealth and privilege, while Emma's was filled with rent notices, second-hand furniture, and dreams she hadn't yet dared to chase. She found her table number printed in a graceful silver font on a card. Table 10. The number sat in the farthest corner of the ballroom, nearly hidden behind a tower of white orchids. She walked there slowly, past groups of guests laughing over champagne and shared histories. Their conversations floated around her, words like investment, summer villa, private resort, phrases that belonged to people who had never had to count coins at the grocery store. When Emma reached her table, only a few seats were occupied. An older couple who seemed entirely absorbed in their own talk, and 2 women scrolling through their phones, both wearing designer gowns that whispered luxury. She smiled politely, placed her clutch on the table, and sat down, hoping to disappear quietly into the rhythm of clinking glasses and background music. Minutes passed, perhaps half an hour, and the wedding ceremony unfolded like something from a film. The bride and groom looked ethereal as they exchanged vows, promising forever beneath a canopy of white roses. Emma smiled, feeling genuinely happy for Lily, yet somewhere deep inside a small ache pulsed, a whisper reminding her that she was 30, single, and uncertain about everything ahead. She had no date, no companion, and the empty chair beside her reminded her of that fact more sharply than she liked to admit. Every so often she glanced toward it, imagining a stranger sitting there, someone who might notice her, someone who might see her not as invisible but as human. It was a silly thought, she told herself, and she turned her gaze back to her untouched salad. Then a voice deep and calm broke the silence near her. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Emma looked up and for a heartbeat forgot to breathe. The man standing before her was tall, dressed in a perfectly fitted black tuxedo that caught the soft light of the chandeliers. His hair was dark and slightly tousled, like it refused to obey perfection, and his eyes, a striking shade of grayish blue, seemed to hold both focus and ease. There was something quietly confident about the way he carried himself, as if this entire evening were just another scene he knew how to navigate. No, it's not," Emma said quickly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Please have a seat." He smiled. Not the polite kind of smile people give out of obligation, but one that warmed his entire expression. "Thanks, I'm Ethan Blake." He offered his hand across the table. "Emma Collins," she replied, shaking it gently. His handshake was firm yet kind, and she felt an unexpected spark. Not the kind that rushes to romance, but the kind that tells you this person carries stories worth listening to. "So, Emma Collins," Ethan said as he sat down, "how did you get lucky enough to end up at the famous overflow table?" She laughed, surprised at how easily the sound escaped her. "I'm not sure lucky is the word I'd use. I guess I was the guest they didn't quite know where to place." "Then we already have something in common," he replied, taking a sip of water. "I'm the best man who ran away from his duties. If I have to listen to one more joke about catching the bouquet, I might hide under the table." Emma smiled again. "The best man, huh?" That means you're close to the groom? Ethan nodded. We've been friends since college. He's a good guy. Found himself a wonderful bride. They deserve tonight. The warmth in his tone softened something inside Emma. For a while, they spoke about ordinary things. The awkwardness of weddings. The overcooked chicken served at most receptions. The strange expectation to look like you're having the time of your life even when you don't know anyone. Ethan had an ease in conversation that made her forget where she was. He asked about her work. She told him she managed a small flower shop downtown. And he listened with genuine curiosity, not the polite nod people usually give. When she spoke about how flowers could carry meaning, how a certain color or arrangement could change a person's entire day, he didn't laugh or change the subject. Instead, he asked, "Do you like what you do?" "I love it," Emma said after a pause. "It doesn't pay much, but every time I see someone smile when they hold something I've made, I feel like I've done something right." Ethan looked at her as though she'd just said something profound. "That's rare. Most people chase numbers and titles. You're chasing meaning. That's brave." His words caught her off guard. Brave. No one had ever called her that before. She'd been called kind, quiet, dependable, but never brave. Something in her chest softened again, like a frozen window slowly warming under sunlight. She realized then that the ballroom no longer felt as intimidating. The laughter around her no longer felt like a wall. It felt like background music to something quietly unfolding between them. As the night deepened, the band began to play a slow, graceful tune, and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Emma watched the twirling gowns and steady movements, her heart fluttering with both admiration and fear. Dancing had never been her strength. She often avoided it, afraid of looking clumsy or out of place. But when Ethan stood and offered his hand, saying softly, "Dance with me," she didn't find a reason to refuse. She placed her hand in his, feeling his palm warm against hers. He led her gently to the center of the floor. The moment his arm circled her waist, time seemed to shift. The lights softened, the chatter faded, and all she could hear was the slow rhythm guiding their steps. Ethan moved effortlessly, not with showy grace but with quiet confidence. He looked at her, not around the room, not at who might be watching, but directly into her eyes. "Relax," he murmured. "Just follow my lead." So she did, and for those few minutes Emma Collins, the woman who had arrived alone, uncertain and invisible, felt as if she belonged completely. The song ended, and as they stood there, the applause for the newlyweds filled the air. Yet her heart beat only to the memory of the moment they had shared. Ethan leaned slightly closer, his voice low. "You dance beautifully." Emma laughed, breathless. "You're lying." "I don't lie," he said with an easy smile. "I just have good taste." They returned to their table, and Emma noticed the curious glances from nearby guests. Some whispered. Others smiled knowingly. But for the first time, she didn't care. There was something different in the way she sat now. Her shoulders straight, her eyes alive with light. After dessert, as speeches began and the band took a break, Ethan turned slightly toward her. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I didn't really want to come tonight," he admitted. "I thought it would be just another predictable evening filled with small talk and empty compliments. But then you looked up at me and smiled, and suddenly it didn't feel like a room full of strangers anymore." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. "That's unexpectedly sweet," he shrugged lightly. "Truth usually is." The night continued in soft conversation and laughter that felt easy and unforced. They talked about childhood dreams, favorite books, places they wished to see. Emma found herself confessing that she once wanted to open her own floral studio, a place where each bouquet told a story. But life had made that dream seem distant. Ethan listened quietly, then said, "Maybe it's not distant. Maybe it's just waiting for you to believe in it again." Those words stayed with her long after the last dance ended, after the bouquet had been thrown, after the lights dimmed and people began to leave in clusters of cheerful goodbyes. When Emma finally stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against her cheeks. She turned and saw Ethan standing at the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking up at the sky as though he, too, didn't want the night to end. He caught her gaze and smiled. "Do you need a ride?" She hesitated. "I took the bus. Then let me drive you home." "Please." Consider it a thank you for saving me from another forced conversation about investment portfolios. Emma almost refused out of habit, the instinct to remain polite, to decline kindness before it could turn into disappointment. But something inside whispered that maybe this was one of those rare moments that could change everything. So she nodded. All right. They walked together toward the parking area where a black sedan waited. The city glowed softly in the distance, and as he drove through the quiet streets, they spoke about little things. Music, favorite foods, the way rainy mornings always felt poetic. There was no rush, no awkwardness, only the kind of silence that feels like understanding. When they reached her apartment building, Emma turned to him and smiled shyly. Thank you, Ethan, for tonight. He looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, Emma Collins, for reminding me what real connection feels like. She stepped out of the car, her heart still racing, and watched as he drove away. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars, and for the first time in years, Emma didn't feel small beneath them. She felt seen. She felt alive. That night lying in bed, the memories replayed, his laughter, his words, the way his eyes had looked into hers, and though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing with quiet certainty. Something had changed forever, and somewhere across the city, Ethan Blake sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the same stars replaying the same evening, and wondering how a woman he had met by chance at a wedding had managed to make the world feel new again. The next morning arrived with the muted hush of gray light slipping through the thin curtains of Emma's apartment. The air carried the faint scent of yesterday's lilies that still sat in a glass jar on the windowsill, leftovers from an arrangement she had built for the shop but couldn't bring herself to throw away. She sat at her small kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as her mind replayed flashes from the wedding. The music, the laughter, and most of all Ethan Blake's steady gaze that had felt like sunlight cutting through a life lived mostly in shade. She had not expected someone like him, composed, confident, quietly magnetic, to notice someone like her for more than a moment. It felt impossible, and yet the memory of his voice still lingered with the warmth of something real. For a while she just stared at her reflection in the coffee's dark surface, thinking how strange it was that a single night could rearrange the furniture of one's thoughts so completely. When she finally gathered herself and headed to work, the day greeted her with the familiar comfort of routine. The flower shop was tucked on a quiet corner of Maple Street, its wooden sign faded by rain and sunlight but still proud. Inside, the air smelled of earth and sweetness, petals and promise. Emma had built this little world out of patience and love. Rows of roses lined in color gradients, buckets filled with daisies and tulips, tiny succulents sitting like green jewels near the counter. She lost herself in the rhythm of trimming stems, arranging bouquets, and greeting the handful of loyal customers who always stopped by for a chat. Yet beneath the calm surface of her work, her thoughts drifted back to him. Ethan Blake, the man who had made her laugh like she hadn't in years. She wondered what he was doing now, probably sitting in an office high above the city, surrounded by glass and steel, deciding the fate of companies with a single signature. People like him didn't simply drift into the lives of people like her. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't finished. Late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to dip behind the tall buildings, the small bell above the shop door chimed. Emma looked up automatically, ready with her usual smile. The words froze on her tongue. Standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by golden light, was Ethan Blake himself. He wore a charcoal gray suit, perfectly tailored, but his expression was softened by something unguarded, an ease that didn't belong to boardrooms. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled, the same genuine smile that had disarmed her at the wedding. I was in the neighborhood, he said, his voice low but clear. And I remembered someone telling me she worked with flowers. Thought I'd see if that was true. Emma blinked, caught between disbelief and delight. You remembered, she managed, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. Yes, this is my shop. Well, technically not mine yet. I just manage it. It suits you, Ethan said, walking slowly through the rows of flowers, his gaze moving over the petals as though they were small works of art. It's peaceful here. Feels like every corner is breathing. She laughed softly. That's the goal. Flowers make people pause. Even the busiest hearts stop for a moment to notice them. Ethan looked at her then, not at the flowers, not at the shelves, but straight into her eyes. You make people pause too, Emma. Her breath caught again. She looked away, pretending to fix a ribbon on a nearby bouquet. You have a habit of saying things people remember, Mr. Blake. He grinned. That's the first time someone's called me that without an agenda. Most people say it hoping I'll sign a deal or fund a project. So you are a businessman. She teased lightly, grateful for the chance to shift the attention. Guilty, he admitted. But I'd rather be a good man than just a successful one. There was a quiet sincerity in his words that made her heart twist in a strange, tender way. For the next half hour, Ethan stayed in the shop, asking questions about the meanings of flowers, listening with genuine curiosity as Emma spoke about how each stem carried emotion, hope, forgiveness, beginnings. When she showed him the lavender roses she had arranged that morning, explaining they symbolized enchantment and mystery, he smiled and said, "Then I think I've found my favorite." He bought them all, refusing the discount she offered. Before leaving, he turned at the door and said softly, "I'm having a small event next week for one of my charity foundations. Would you consider handling the floral arrangements? It's nothing huge, but it would mean a lot to have someone who actually understands the language of flowers." Emma hesitated. Her shop had never catered to such events before. She mostly served birthdays and local weddings. "Are you sure? There are bigger companies." "I'm sure," Ethan interrupted gently. "Sometimes the best beauty comes from small places." When he left, the shop felt suddenly too quiet, the air heavy with the scent of lavender and possibility. Emma stood by the counter, her heart racing with both excitement and fear. She had been given an opportunity, one that could change her little world, but it also terrified her. She spent that night sketching ideas, trying to imagine arrangements that would fit a formal event without losing their natural warmth. Somewhere between pencil lines and midnight coffee, she realized she was smiling. The following week moved in a blur of preparation. Emma worked tirelessly, sourcing the freshest blooms, designing tall centerpieces of white lilies and green vines that cascaded like rivers of light. The day of the event arrived faster than she expected. The venue, a renovated art gallery overlooking the river, was elegant but understated, filled with paintings and soft piano music. Emma arrived early to set up, her hand steady but her heart unsteady. As she placed the final vase on a marble table, she felt someone's presence behind her. "You've outdone yourself," Ethan said quietly. She turned and saw him standing there in a dark blue suit, his tie undone, his expression one of quiet awe. "This place looks alive. You turned it into something magical." "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how close he was, of the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the flowers. "I just wanted it to feel natural, not forced." "It feels like you," he said simply. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was charged with something fragile and unspoken, an understanding that went beyond words. But then guests began arriving, and Ethan was pulled away by handshakes and introductions. Emma retreated to a quiet corner, watching him move through the crowd. He was composed and gracious, every inch the man of influence. Yet there were moments when his eyes searched the room until they found hers. Every time they did, she felt that same quiet warmth spread through her chest. As the evening unfolded, she overheard fragments of conversation. People talking about Ethan's success, his investments, the empire he had built by 35. Some spoke of admiration, others with envy. Emma listened quietly, realizing how little she actually knew about his world. He wasn't just charming, he was powerful, and for the first time doubt crept in. What did she have to offer someone like him? She was a florist with more bills than savings, living in a small apartment and still afraid to dream too big. Yet when he finally returned to her side, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider, his expression softened as if none of that mattered. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. She hesitated. "Are we starting something new?" Ethan's eyes held hers, steady and calm. "I hope so." The clink of their glasses sounded like a promise neither of them dared to define. Later, as the night deepened, Ethan walked her out to the street where the river shimmered beneath moonlight. The city lights reflected off the water, painting their faces in soft silver. For a long time they stood there in silence, listening to the gentle murmur of traffic and laughter from the gallery behind them. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "You know, people spend their whole lives chasing what they think they're missing. Money, status, recognition. But sometimes the most extraordinary thing is finding someone who makes you forget all that for a moment. Emma looked at him, unsure what to say. His tone was honest, not flirtatious, and in that honesty she felt seen again, just as she had at the wedding. "And what about you?" she asked softly. "Have you found that?" He smiled faintly. "I might be getting close." Her heart stuttered, but before she could respond, a car pulled up, a sleek black vehicle waiting to take him away. He looked at her for a long second, as if memorizing her face, then said, "I'll call you tomorrow." When he left, Emma stood there for several minutes, watching the taillights fade into the distance. The night air was cool against her skin, but she felt warm inside, wrapped in the strange certainty that her life was shifting. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was curious, hopeful, alive. That night, back in her apartment, she placed one of the leftover lavender roses in a vase beside her bed. Its petals caught the moonlight through the window, glowing faintly in the darkness. She whispered to herself, almost a prayer, "Maybe some stories don't begin in grand ways. Maybe they begin quietly, with kindness, with courage, with one unexpected person sitting beside you at a wedding." Outside, the city hummed, unaware that somewhere within its endless lights, two lives that should never have crossed were beginning to entwine, delicately, uncertainly, beautifully. And though neither Emma Collins nor Ethan Blake knew what storms or miracles lay ahead, both had felt something undeniable, a connection too rare to be coincidence. The following week unfolded like a dream, carefully stitched together with fragile thread. Every morning Emma woke with an unusual lightness, a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to the clock or her small paycheck, but to a feeling that something extraordinary was quietly taking root in her life. Ethan had kept his promise. He called the next day, not with formality but with warmth, as if continuing a conversation that had never truly ended. Their talks became daily rituals, sometimes short, sometimes long, often about everything and nothing. They spoke about work, about favorite books, about the simplicity of good coffee and the mystery of late-night thoughts. Emma found herself laughing more, feeling seen, and slowly realizing how much she had been living inside her own quiet walls. Yet amid the joy, a gentle unease also grew, like the soft ache after a beautiful song ends too soon. She reminded herself that Ethan Blake belonged to a world far above hers, a world that sparkled with privilege and expectation. She, on the other hand, belonged to the ordinary, to the quiet rhythm of routine and small hopes. Their next meeting came almost by accident, or so she thought. It was a Sunday morning, crisp and golden, when Emma walked into a small cafe she loved near the park. The scent of baked pastries mingled with the laughter of families enjoying brunch. She ordered her usual, a latte with cinnamon, and found a seat by the window. When she looked up, she froze. Across the cafe, sitting alone with a newspaper and a cup of black coffee, was Ethan. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she was dreaming. But then he looked up, saw her, and his face broke into that disarming smile she had come to recognize instantly. He stood, motioned for her to join him, and she did, trying to hide the quickened beat of her heart. "I was beginning to think I'd have to call you just to hear your voice," he said lightly as she sat down. "And miss my morning coffee ritual?" "Never," she teased, her nerves settling into comfort as their conversation flowed, effortlessly. He told her he had just come from a meeting with one of his foundation's directors, something about funding, educational programs for underprivileged children. She listened, fascinated, as he described the vision behind his work, realizing that the man she had met at the wedding wasn't just successful. He was purposeful. He didn't flaunt his wealth. He used it to create opportunities for others. The more he spoke, the more she saw the heart beneath the reputation. And the more he looked at her, the more she realized that beneath her modest life, she carried something he deeply admired: authenticity, unfiltered and kind. They spent hours in that cafe, unaware of how time slipped by. When they finally stepped outside, the day had mellowed into soft sunlight that painted the city gold. Ethan suggested a walk through the park. The trees whispered above them, their leaves rustling like secrets. Children laughed in the distance, and somewhere a street musician played a gentle tune on his guitar. It felt like the world had paused just for them. "You make it sound easy," Emma said as they strolled. "Balancing charity work, business, everything. Don't you ever feel tired?" Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "All the time. but I've learned that purpose doesn't drain you, it sustains you. The more you give, the more you realize what truly matters. It's people, Emma. It's always people. She smiled at that, feeling something stir inside her, a quiet admiration that went beyond charm. But before she could respond, a voice called out from behind them. Ethan! There you are. They turned to see a woman approaching, elegant in every detail. She wore a tailored cream coat, her hair gleaming like spun gold, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. There was familiarity in the way she said his name, a kind of ownership that made Emma's stomach tighten. Vanessa, Ethan said, his tone polite but distant. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same, she replied, glancing at Emma briefly before turning her attention back to him. Your assistant mentioned you were in town. I thought we could discuss the upcoming board dinner. You never responded to my email. I've been busy, Ethan said simply. Vanessa's eyes flickered again toward Emma, her perfectly shaped eyebrow arching slightly. And who's your friend? Emma Collins, he said, stepping closer to Emma as if the introduction itself was a quiet statement. She's a friend. The word friend echoed softly in Emma's mind. She smiled politely, offering her hand. Vanessa shook it with the faintest hint of surprise, her tone smooth but sharp. Nice to meet you. I've heard Ethan doesn't make many new friends these days. Ethan cut in before Emma could respond. Vanessa is a colleague, he said. We've worked together for years. Indeed, Vanessa said with a small, knowing smile, and some of us hope to keep it that way. The tension was invisible to the passerby, but heavy enough for Emma to feel it tighten in the air. Vanessa eventually excused herself, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and a silence that felt too large. Emma exhaled slowly. She seems important to your work. She's good at what she does, Ethan admitted, but she also believes life is about hierarchy and image. I stopped living like that a long time ago. They walked again, though the easy calm from before had changed. Something inside Emma had shifted, an awareness of how different their lives truly were. She wanted to believe that connection could bridge every gap, but as she looked at him, polished and poised even in simplicity, she wondered whether she was walking next to someone destined for a world she could never touch. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened quietly. Ethan began visiting her shop more often, sometimes under the pretense of buying flowers, other times simply to talk. He'd help her restock shelves, share coffee during slow afternoons, and occasionally bring takeout when she worked late. They laughed about little things, shared silences that felt sacred. Yet beneath the surface, unspoken questions bloomed like vines. What did this mean? Where was it going? Neither dared to ask, afraid the words might break the spell. Then one evening, while she was closing the shop, a black car pulled up outside. She recognized it immediately, Ethan's driver. But it wasn't Ethan who stepped out. It was Vanessa. The sight of her alone was enough to make Emma's pulse quicken. Vanessa's expression was calm but calculated, her tone smooth as silk. You must be Emma. Do you mind if I come in for a moment? Emma hesitated but nodded. Vanessa walked through the shop, her eyes moving over the flowers as if assessing their worth. It's charming, she said finally. Simple, honest, I can see why Ethan finds it. Refreshing. Can I help you with something? Emma asked softly. Vanessa smiled, though her eyes stayed cold. Help? No, I just wanted to make something clear. Ethan Blake is an extraordinary man. He has responsibilities, connections, and a reputation to maintain. The people in his circle, our circle, live by certain expectations. You seem kind, and I'm sure your friendship means something to him, but I hope you understand the difference between admiration and possibility. The words struck with polite precision. Emma felt the ground shift slightly beneath her, the weight of her insecurities pressing harder than before. You don't have to worry, she said quietly. I know who I am. Vanessa nodded as though satisfied. Good. Then you understand what's best for both of you. With that, she turned and left, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on cold stone. For a long while, Emma stood alone in the quiet shop. The hum of the city outside felt distant. She looked around at the flowers she had so lovingly arranged, symbols of beauty, hope, and renewal, and felt tears sting her eyes. She knew Vanessa wasn't cruel. She was simply part of a reality Emma could never compete with. And yet, even as doubt threatened to drown her, another voice whispered faintly within, You are not less because someone else shines differently. When Ethan came by the next day, he found her distant, quieter than usual. She didn't mention Vanessa's visit, and he didn't press, but he sensed it, the invisible wall that had begun to rise between them. Over the next week, their calls grew shorter, their laughter softer. Life's edges returned, sharp and demanding. Emma told herself it was inevitable, that their worlds had touched briefly like two stars passing in the night, beautiful but never meant to orbit each other. Then, one rainy evening, her phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice was softer than usual, tinged with something vulnerable. "Emma, I need to see you. Can I come by?" Minutes later, he arrived drenched from the rain, his hair tousled, his usually perfect composure replaced by raw exhaustion. "What happened?" she asked, guiding him inside, handing him a towel. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. "I had a meeting with the board. They're pushing me to merge one of my companies with a corporation I don't trust. When I refused, they hinted I might be replaced as CEO. Apparently, my priorities have changed too much. They think I've gone soft." Emma frowned. "That's unfair. You've been doing good work." He looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. "I used to think success meant control. Now I realize it means peace. And lately, peace feels like it begins here, with you." Her heart swelled, tears burning behind her eyes. "Ethan," but he shook his head gently, a faint smile touching his lips. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." They sat together in silence, the sound of rain whispering against the windows. It wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale or the end of one. It was something deeper. The moment two lives, so different yet so aligned in spirit, found the courage to simply be. When he left that night, Emma watched him disappear into the misty rain, her heart heavy yet full of something she couldn't name, love perhaps, or hope, or the belief that maybe, just maybe, the distance between stars wasn't as impossible to cross as everyone believed. The days that followed the stormy night blurred into a strange stillness, a delicate pause between what had been said and what was still waiting to be understood. Emma continued to run her flower shop with the same care as always, but beneath the surface, something inside her had changed. Ethan's confession lingered like a melody she couldn't stop hearing. The way he had spoken of peace, of how it began with her, of how he had found meaning beyond the walls of his success. Those words became both comfort and burden, sweet and heavy all at once. She wanted to believe that love could bloom quietly between two worlds so different, but part of her still feared that it would fade the moment sunlight hit it. Like a dream too fragile to survive reality, Ethan, on the other hand, was living through his own storm. The boardroom that had once been his kingdom now felt like a battlefield. Colleagues whispered about distractions and poor judgment. Investors questioned his focus. Some even hinted that his sudden interest in simpler causes and personal pursuits had weakened his edge. He ignored most of it, at least outwardly, but behind the composed exterior he was wrestling with a truth he could no longer deny. He was tired of living for appearances. For years he had chased deals and numbers, filling every empty space in his life with victories that brought applause but no peace. Now all he wanted was honesty, something unpolished but real, something that felt like Emma. Yet as he looked at the empire he had built, he knew walking away wouldn't be easy. People depended on him, watched him, and expected him to remain unshakable. One afternoon, he drove across the city without telling his assistant, stopping in front of the little flower shop that had become his quiet refuge. The moment he walked in, the noise of the world fell away. The air was filled with the scent of fresh peonies and lilies, soft music playing in the background, and Emma standing near the counter tying ribbons around a bouquet of sunflowers. When she looked up and saw him, the warmth that filled her eyes was enough to make everything else disappear. "You look exhausted," she said gently, setting the bouquet aside. "Maybe," he admitted with a small smile, "but this place makes it hard to stay tired." She walked around the counter, brushing a few petals from her apron. "You shouldn't keep running from your world just to hide here." "Maybe I'm not hiding," he said softly. "Maybe I'm finally breathing." Her heart skipped a beat at the tenderness in his voice. But before she could respond, the sound of cameras clicking shattered the moment. They both turned toward the front door, where two men with press badges were snapping photos through the glass. In seconds they were gone, the bell above the door still trembling from their brief intrusion. Emma looked at Ethan. confusion written across her face. He exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They've been following me since the board confrontation. I didn't think they'd come here. Following you, why? Because they think I'm about to step down as CEO, and they're looking for a story, any story. Something scandalous, something dramatic. His eyes darkened as realization struck. And now they found you. Emma's stomach dropped. Me? He stepped closer, his voice calm but edged with frustration. They'll twist anything. A photograph, a headline. They'll make it look like something it's not. Something it's not. She repeated quietly, the words catching in her throat. And what is it, Ethan? What are we? For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then he said, something real. Something I don't want to lose. Her chest tightened at his sincerity, but fear was already whispering louder than hope. I'm not built for your world, Ethan. You're used to power and control. I'm just trying to keep my lights on. If they start digging, if people begin talking, let them talk, he said firmly. I don't care what they say. But he did care. She could see it in the flicker of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened. She reached for his hand, squeezing it lightly. I believe you, but I also know what reputation means to people like them. You've worked your whole life for that image. Don't let me be the reason they tear it apart. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. You're not the reason, Emma. You're the reminder that I want something better than all this. Still, the story broke 2 days later. A single photo of Ethan Blake, one of the city's youngest and most influential business figures, standing inside a modest flower shop, smiling at a woman the tabloids quickly labeled the mystery florist. The headline ran wild across gossip columns and financial news alike. CEO's secret distraction? Blake's blooming connection? Within hours, her shop's phone began ringing nonstop. Some calls were from curious strangers, others from reporters asking invasive questions she refused to answer. A few were kind, but most were cruel. They questioned her motives, her integrity, even her character. It was overwhelming. Ethan tried to shield her, issuing a statement that dismissed the rumors as personal fabrications while refusing to name her. But the more he tried to protect her privacy, the more curious the public became. By the end of the week, a journalist had identified her by name, and the quiet shop on Maple Street had become a spectacle. Emma began closing early, drawing the blinds and avoiding her phone altogether. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the realization that her peaceful life had been invaded by a world that thrived on noise. One evening, she sat alone on the floor of her shop, surrounded by petals that had fallen from half-finished bouquets. The lights were dim, and her heart felt heavier than it ever had. The door opened quietly, and she didn't need to look up to know who it was. I told you this would happen, she said softly. I know, Ethan replied, walking closer, his expression filled with guilt and helplessness. I tried to stop it. You can't stop people from talking, she whispered. They'll always need someone to pull down so they can feel taller. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. Then let them talk. They don't define us. She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Maybe not. But I define me, Ethan. And right now I don't recognize myself anymore. I built this life quietly without needing to be noticed. Now every stranger thinks they know who I am. They think I'm with you because of your money, your name, your power. He reached for her hand again, his voice breaking slightly. You're with me because you saw me when no one else did. And I'm with you because you remind me who I am when everyone else sees only what I have. I can't lose that, Emma. I can't lose you. The raw honesty in his tone made her heart ache, but even love felt heavy under the weight of public judgment. Maybe you need to fix your world first, she said quietly. Not for me, for yourself. And when you do, if you still want to find me, I'll be here. But I can't be part of the noise, Ethan. I just can't. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes full of understanding and sorrow. I'll fix it, he promised. And I'll find you again. When he left that night, the silence felt like loss and love woven together. Over the next few weeks, she focused on rebuilding her peace, though it wasn't easy. The shop slowly regained calm as public attention shifted elsewhere. She spent her mornings tending to plants, her afternoons arranging flowers, her nights sitting by the window watching city lights flicker like faraway stars. There were moments she missed him so deeply it hurt to breathe, but she reminded herself that sometimes love had to step aside to allow healing to take its course. Meanwhile, Ethan withdrew from the spotlight. He began restructuring his company, delegating power, refocusing his foundations toward education and sustainable growth. The media called it a strategic reinvention, but those who knew him sensed something deeper. He wasn't reinventing his empire. He was rediscovering his humanity. The same newspapers that once mocked his mystery florist now praised his commitment to authenticity and purpose. For months, he stayed out of the social circuit. No parties, no interviews, no headlines, just quiet work and quiet change. One evening, as the first hints of winter painted the city sky with fading pink light, Emma locked up the shop and turned to leave. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she froze. There he was, Ethan Blake, standing under the soft glow of the street lamp, holding a single bouquet of lavender roses, their color as mysterious and hopeful as the night they first met. He smiled, a little uncertain, a little hopeful. "You once told me lavender meant enchantment," he said softly. "I suppose I never stopped being enchanted." Emma's heart fluttered, tears welling before she could stop them. "You shouldn't be here." "The cameras—" "There aren't any," he interrupted gently. "Not anymore. I sold my company shares last month. I stepped down from the board. I started a foundation instead, one that actually does what it promises. And I realized something along the way. Peace isn't a place you find, Emma. It's a person you fight for." The words hung in the cool night air, sincere and steady. She took a slow step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the tired joy in his eyes. "You didn't have to give up everything," he smiled faintly. "I didn't give up anything that mattered. For a long time, they simply stood there, the noise of the world fading into the background, replaced by the quiet rhythm of hearts that had waited, healed, and found their way back." She took the bouquet from his hands, her fingers brushing against his, and whispered, "Welcome back, Ethan." "Home," he said softly, eyes never leaving hers. "You're home." The city lights shimmered around them like 1,000 blessings, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang softly as if marking a new beginning. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely offers those, but it was a beautiful one, born from courage, patience, and love that refused to be defined by the noise of the world. The world outside had turned quiet in the months that followed Ethan's return. Winter had melted away slowly, and spring had begun to bloom with shy colors across the city. Soft greens on trees, golden warmth spilling from early morning light, and the scent of renewal drifting through every street. For Emma, life had found its balance again, though it no longer felt like the modest calm it once was. There was something deeper in her now, something steady like a river that had learned how to keep flowing even after every storm. The flower shop was thriving. Customers came not because of the gossip that had once shadowed her name, but because of the grace with which she had handled it all. She had become a quiet example of resilience, humble, kind, and quietly strong. Yet somewhere in her heart, a space still waited for Ethan Blake, the man who had once sat beside her at a wedding and changed the rhythm of her life with a single conversation. When he had appeared, under the streetlight that winter evening, holding lavender roses and a promise in his eyes, it had felt like the world had finally exhaled. Since then, he had visited often, but never with grand gestures or declarations. He had changed, and so had she. Their connection was no longer a fragile thread of wonder, but a bond built from choices, from patience, from quiet trust. He still carried the air of someone who had known power, but now it was tempered with humility, like gold reshaped by fire. She saw it in the way he listened, in the way he spoke softly to her elderly customers, in how he no longer filled silence with ambition, but with peace. One evening, as the sun sank low and poured amber light through the shop's wide front window, Ethan arrived just as Emma was closing. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her arrange the last bouquet of the day, tulips and wild daisies tied with a silk ribbon. "You still lose yourself in your work," he said, his voice warm with admiration. She looked up, smiling faintly. "And you still sneak in right before I close. I'm starting to think it's your favorite time of day." "It is," he said simply. "It's when everything slows down, when the world finally stops asking for something." He stepped closer, his eyes sweeping gently over the little space she had built with her hands. The flowers, the faded wooden counter, the shelves lined with vases that caught the last light like small pieces of the sun. "Do you ever think about expanding?" he asked. Opening a second shop? Maybe downtown? I could help you if... She cut him off with a gentle smile. You could help me with everything, Ethan, but I want to do some things on my own. This shop, it's my heart. I don't want it to become something I can't recognize. He nodded slowly, a look of pride in his eyes. That's exactly why I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest, yet so profound that Emma's heart stilled for a moment. He had never said it before, not like that, not in words. He had shown it through gestures, through presence, through the quiet ways he stayed. But now he had named it, and the sound of it filled the room like sunlight. She blinked, trying to steady her breath. You shouldn't just say things like that out of nowhere. I've been saying it silently for months, he replied softly. But silence deserves to rest now. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she didn't look away. I love you too, she whispered. The world seemed to pause in that instant, the hum of the city fading, the ticking of the small wall clock disappearing, even the soft rustle of petals stilled. It was as if the entire universe had been waiting for those words to be spoken aloud. He took her hands in his, holding them gently but firmly, the way someone holds something sacred. You once told me that every flower has meaning, he said. So what do lavender roses mean again? Enchantment, she said softly. And new beginnings. Then that's what this is, he whispered. A new beginning. Their relationship, however, was not a fairy tale. It was real, shaped by the small details that fill ordinary days. They cooked together, argued sometimes about simple things, laughed over burned dinners, and learned how to exist in the same silence without needing to fill it. Ethan, now free from corporate titles, devoted his time to his foundation, teaching young entrepreneurs from modest backgrounds how to build businesses with integrity. He often invited Emma to his workshops to teach the art of emotional expression through flowers. She spoke shyly at first, but soon her passion bloomed into confidence, and she became a voice of inspiration for people who had forgotten that beauty could still come from simplicity. Months passed, and life unfolded with the slow grace of something finally right. But one day a letter arrived, a formal invitation embossed with gold. It was from Lily Andrews, Emma's old college friend, the same friend whose wedding had started everything. She was hosting a grand anniversary gala at the same hotel where Emma had first met Ethan. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ethan smiled when he read the invitation over her shoulder. Full circle, he said. Emma felt a nervous laugh escape her lips. I remember how awkward I felt that night. I didn't even belong there. And now? He asked, eyes gleaming with quiet pride. She looked around at the shop she had rebuilt, at the life she had chosen, and then back at him. Now I think I finally do. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in elegance and light. The Grandwood Hotel looked just as magnificent as before, its chandeliers sparkling like constellations. Guests arrived in polished cars dressed in finery that whispered of old wealth and newer dreams. But when Emma walked through the doors wearing a simple gown of midnight blue and a calm, radiant smile, the room itself seemed to shift. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt grounded. Ethan walked beside her in a tailored black suit, not the CEO of an empire, but a man simply proud to be with the woman who had taught him how to live with purpose. The evening flowed with laughter and music, with toasts and memories. Lily greeted them both with joyful surprise, embracing Emma with genuine warmth. You look beautiful, she said sincerely. So do you, Emma replied, smiling. And thank you for inviting me back to the beginning. As the night deepened, Ethan led Emma onto the dance floor. The same ballroom that had once made her feel invisible now glowed softly around her, and when Ethan's hand found hers, everything else disappeared. They moved together slowly, gracefully, the music wrapping around them like an old promise. Do you remember this song? Ethan murmured against her hair. She nodded, her voice a whisper. The same song we danced to the night we met, he smiled. I remember thinking then that it was just a moment. I didn't know it would become my life. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not of sadness but of awe. We both changed so much, she said, and somehow we still found our way back. Because real love doesn't demand perfection, he replied softly. It just asks you to stay honest through every imperfection. Their dance slowed to stillness, and in that quiet, surrounded by people and light and history, it felt as though the universe had finally aligned. The same hotel that had once been the stage for her insecurity was now the witness to her transformation. She no longer felt like the girl in the corner hiding behind her fears. She was Emma Collins, the woman who had faced storms with grace, who had believed in kindness when the world was unkind, who had taught even a millionaire what it meant to be rich in soul. As the night came to an end, they stepped out onto the terrace where the city lights glittered like scattered dreams. The air was cool and the sound of distant laughter drifted up from below. Ethan took her hand, his eyes reflecting both the city and the woman he adored. "You know what I realized tonight?" he asked quietly. "What?" "That sometimes the most extraordinary stories don't start with grand plans. They begin when a woman shows up at a wedding she didn't want to attend, wearing a thrift store dress, and a man sits beside her not knowing that she's about to change his entire world." Emma laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she leaned against him. "And sometimes," she whispered, "the man who thought he had everything realizes he was missing the one thing that actually mattered." He brushed her hair gently from her face and kissed her forehead. "Here's to what really matters," he said. The night stretched endless above them, the stars glimmering faintly like reminders of all that had been lost and found. Below, the city hummed with life, unaware that somewhere above its noise, two people stood together, proof that love doesn't need to be loud to be eternal, that strength isn't in wealth or fame but in the courage to stay gentle in a world that isn't. Years later, when people spoke of Ethan Blake, they didn't talk about the billionaire who walked away from his empire. They talked about the man who built something better, schools, programs, opportunities, and about the quiet woman who had inspired it all. Together they became a symbol not of glamour but of grace. Emma's flower shop became a foundation headquarters, yet it still smelled of lilies and lavender and carried a small plaque by the door that read, "Where Peace Began." And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Ethan would close the shop early, pour 2 cups of tea, and sit with Emma by the window as they watched the world outside. He would take her hand and say softly, "You still make the world stop, you know." And she would smile and reply, "No, love. The world didn't stop. We just finally learned how to live inside it." And that was how their story truly ended, not with noise, not with applause, but with peace. She had no date, no friends at the wedding. Then the groom's millionaire friend sat beside her. A story about love born from humility, courage found in vulnerability, and two souls proving that sometimes the quietest connections create the loudest echoes.